If you agree that true strength isn't always loud or worn on the shoulder, but shown quietly in service, then like and subscribe. Because this story isn't about medals or uniforms. It's about a woman who carried both and never needed either to prove who she was. They found the note years later, pressed between pages of an old recipe book, for the platoon that taught me how to lead again. Next to it was a photo, brownies on a metal tray, smudged fingerprints of chocolate on a young woman's sleeve, and a name stitched above the heart. Luna. That was how it started. On a sun-beaten base in Arizona, with the smell of cocoa drifting through the barracks and a dozen cadets half asleep from morning drills, teasing the baker sergeant, who always seemed too gentle for command. I remember because I was there. One of those cadets, hands still raw from weapon checks, leaning against the counter as she mixed another batch. Her sleeves were rolled just above her elbows, exposing a faint scar that no one dared ask about. She moved with quiet precision. No wasted gestures. No noise except the whisk scraping the bowl. We thought she was just another morale boost assignment from HQ. Maybe reassigned for being too kind, too soft. But she burned out in officer school. Corporal Haynes had whispered once. Now she's baking her way back into relevance. We laughed, not out of cruelty but ignorance, until that afternoon changed everything. It was quiet except for the hum of the ovens and the steady rhythm of Luna's hands. She was humming an old song, military, maybe, or something older, and the sound had a calm to it that even the storm drills couldn't shake. I remember her glancing at us with that soft smile. "You boys done picking on my brownies?" she said, playful but with a tone that made you stop. Before anyone could answer, the speakers above us crackled, harsh, metallic, slicing through the scent of chocolate and laughter. "Attention base personnel. All units to alert status. Sergeant Luna, secure command quarters immediately." The whisk stopped midair. I still remember the sound of it clattering against the counter. Every head turned toward her, a dozen pairs of wide, confused eyes watching this woman. Apron on, hair pinned back, straightened as if her spine had remembered something sacred. Her expression didn't change, but the air around her did. She didn't flinch, didn't hesitate. She simply wiped her hands on a towel, pulled her cap lower, and said in a voice we'd never heard before, "Haynes, lock the mess doors. Everyone else, follow my lead." We obeyed without question. It wasn't the tone of a cook or a caretaker. It was command, crisp, unshakable. She moved fast, issuing orders to secure entry points, check radios, align with field channels. Her precision was surgical, like muscle memory from another life. When HQ repeated her name again, Sergeant Luna, confirmation code Alpha 7, she responded with a calm command, Luna confirming. Securing now. Her voice didn't waver once. That's when it hit us. She wasn't just a baker. She was someone important, someone HQ knew by name and code. When she opened the armory panel behind the supply rack, something none of us had even known existed, we froze. Inside were security tablets, encrypted comms, and a weapon holster with her name engraved. She strapped it on like it had never left her side. No one spoke. Even the air seemed to pause, thick with realization. "You boys think brownies bake themselves?" she said quietly, and there was something half smiling, half sad in her eyes. She nodded to me. "Cadet, with me." My stomach nodded as I followed her out into the hallway, past walls that suddenly felt narrower. She moved like a ghost through the base, calm in chaos, every motion deliberate. Over the comms, we heard static, reports of a security breach at Command HQ. Nothing major, they said later, but at the time it felt like the world had tilted. And there she was, guiding us like a compass we never knew we had. Every corner cleared, every protocol handled with silent authority. Her calm wasn't forced, it was forged, like steel under pressure. I caught glimpses of the other soldiers watching her, trying to reconcile the woman who brought them desserts with the one now commanding over encrypted channels. In the glow of red alert lights, her face looked older than 29, not from age, but from miles. There were years in her eyes, the kind you only earn by leading men through something dark and surviving to tell no one about it. When the lockdown ended, HQ's voice came through again. "Command secure. Luna, excellent work. Report back to Central. Lieutenant Commander clearance confirmed." You could have heard a pin drop. Haynes looked at her like he'd seen a ghost. "Lieutenant Commander," he whispered, disbelief cracking his voice. Luna only smiled faintly. Titles don't matter much when people need feeding, she said, slipping off the holster and hanging it back on the rack. Now, who's going to help me finish those brownies? None of us moved at first. We were still processing what we'd seen. Our sergeant, the one who made us cocoa when nights got long, had just executed a high-level command operation without breaking a sweat. That day burned itself into our memories like the smell of those brownies that never quite left the air. Some of us would go on to serve under real commanders, some wouldn't make it that far, but none of us ever forgot Luna. She went right back to baking the next morning, same smile, same calm. Only now, we stood a little straighter when she entered the room. Because the truth wasn't just that she'd been someone important, it was that she still was, even when no one was watching. People talk about leadership like it's something loud, something you shout across a battlefield. But Luna taught us different. She taught us that command can whisper, that sometimes the strongest soldiers aren't the ones who lead charges. They're the ones who hand you a brownie, remind you you're human, and still have the instinct to save everyone when the alarms sound. Years later, when I transferred bases, I saw her name once more on an internal memo, Sergeant Luna, Culinary Corps and Tactical Training Liaison. It fit her perfectly. A soldier who fed bodies and trained hearts, who never asked for recognition, who never needed it. And maybe that's why, when they opened her locker after she retired, they found nothing but a folded apron, a field knife, and a note that read, "Command comes in many forms." I chose the sweeter one. I can still taste the cocoa on the air when I remember that day. And every time I smell brownies, I hear her voice again, steady, kind, unbreakable, reminding a room full of foolish cadets what real leadership looks like. They called it a minor breach, but inside those walls, nothing about it felt minor. After the alert ended, the base felt heavier, quieter, like the air itself had witnessed something it couldn't quite explain. The same cadets who once teased Luna now couldn't meet her eyes without straightening their posture. But she walked among us as if nothing had happened. No fanfare, no mention of what she'd done. She simply took off her sidearm, hung it neatly back on the rack, and returned to the oven, where the scent of half-baked brownies still lingered in the air. "These won't finish themselves," she said, as though she hadn't just executed a high-clearance lockdown protocol. Her hands moved the same, steady, sure, but her silence carried a weight that settled into every corner of that kitchen. When she passed out the cooled brownies an hour later, no one dared joke. We just took them, nodding our thanks, unsure if words would even be enough. That night, I found her still in the mess hall long after lights out, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound. She was sitting at one of the steel tables, a cup of coffee cooling beside her, staring out the small window at the flag outside. I hesitated before asking, "You used to be an officer, didn't you?" She didn't turn around, didn't flinch. "Once," she said softly, "but rank doesn't define how you serve. People do." I didn't understand it fully then, but the way she said it stayed with me. When she finally looked at me, her eyes carried something I hadn't seen before. Grief, maybe, or memory. "I made a choice," she said quietly, "to step back, to keep doing what mattered, even if it looked smaller to others." She smiled faintly. Turns out feeding soldiers is another kind of command. By morning, the whole base had heard her name over the radio, Lieutenant Commander Luna. Acting Field Control Authorization confirmed. And that single phrase changed how everyone saw her. Rumors spread quickly, that she'd once led a unit overseas, that she'd been commended for valor, that she'd taken a reassignment by request after losing someone under her command. No one knew the full truth, but no one dared ask. There was something sacred in her silence. Still, she was back in the kitchen before sunrise, apron tied neatly, humming under her breath as if the day before had been nothing more than a drill. The recruits filed in more quietly than usual. Haynes, who'd once joked about her, baking her way through the ranks, now addressed her as "ma'am" without hesitation. She didn't correct him. She simply smiled, handed him a whisk, and said, "Stir clockwise, keeps the air out." Even the way she taught felt deliberate, patient, steady. Watching her, you realized leadership didn't need volume or rank, it needed grace. A week later, HQ sent an official commendation to her quarters, praising her quick response and composure. She never displayed it. I saw it once, folded neatly beside her recipe book, already gathering a dusting of cocoa powder. When I asked why she didn't frame it, she just said, "Paper fades. Actions don't." And with that, she poured batter into another pan, slid it into the oven, and asked me to taste test the next batch. I remember biting into that brownie, still warm and soft, and thinking it was the best thing I'd ever eaten, not because of the chocolate, but because it carried something else. It took me months to understand what it was. Strength, I think. The quiet kind. The kind that doesn't announce itself, doesn't need recognition. The kind that steadies everyone else simply by existing. Luna had more of it than anyone I've ever met. They said the breach had been routine, that no one would remember it by next quarter, but they were wrong. Everyone remembered, because from that day on, nothing about our base felt the same. The cadets who'd once laughed at the brownie lady now spoke about her in hushed tones, like she was a story you didn't want to say too loudly out of respect. Even the senior officers treated her differently. But Luna never changed. She showed up every morning at 0500 sharp, hair pinned tight, sleeves rolled, apron tied like armor. The ovens would roar to life before sunrise, and that same smell of cocoa and burnt sugar drifted through the barracks, wrapping itself around us like a promise that the day would be okay, no matter what it brought. She never mentioned the alert again, not once. When people asked, she just said, "It's handled," and kept mixing. But there was something in the way she stood now, calm but aware. A soldier's posture that never really leaves you, even after you hang the uniform up. I remember one morning vividly. A new batch of recruits had come in, fresh from training, all loud talk and sharp edges. They didn't know Luna's story, hadn't heard her name come over the comms during the lockdown. To them, she was just a cook, another base fixture. I saw one of them, a tall kid named Mason, whisper something under his breath when she passed. She stopped, turned, and smiled like she hadn't heard him. But the next minute, she handed him a tray loaded with hot trays and said, "If you're going to talk, you might as well work while you do it." By the end of the shift, Mason was sweating through his shirt, and Luna patted his shoulder gently. "See? It's not easy to feed a platoon. Takes more coordination than you'd think." He laughed weakly, and from that day on, he was her most loyal helper. That was her power. She didn't humiliate. She didn't demand. She transformed people, one act of quiet patience at a time. Weeks passed, and rumors about her past kept circulating. Stories of her commanding an emergency evacuation under fire, of saving civilians during a flood operation overseas, of refusing an award because too many names were missing from the ceremony. No one ever confirmed anything, but somehow, it didn't matter. The myth of her grew, not through grand stories, but through the little things. The way she knew every cadet's name. The way she remembered who'd lost a letter from home or who hadn't slept in 2 days. She led the kitchen like a squad, efficient, orderly, compassionate. Every plate had purpose, every gesture meaning. I once caught her standing at the doorway after a long day, watching the soldiers eat. There was something like peace in her face. "When they eat together," she said softly, "they remember they're on the same side." That's half the battle. When HQ finally came to recognize her formally, the entire base gathered. The general arrived with an entourage, medals gleaming, speeches prepared. They called her name. Sergeant Luna stepped forward. She did, quietly, no pomp, no salute beyond the one that mattered. When the general offered her reinstatement into full command, she looked at him, eyes calm and kind, and shook her head. "Sir, thank you," she said, "but I'm already serving where I'm needed." He hesitated, then smiled, lowering his voice. "Still leading your own way? I see." She returned the smile. "Always." And that was all. No applause, no ceremony beyond that. But something about the air shifted that day. The entire base, from privates to captains, seemed to stand a little taller after. After she retired, the kitchen didn't close, it couldn't. The soldiers started calling it Luna's Kitchen on their own, and soon even the brass used the name. Her picture went up near the entrance, framed and simple. Luna, smiling faintly, apron dusted with flour, holding a tray of brownies. Beneath it, a small plaque read, "Feed the body. Steady the heart. Lead with both." It became a kind of motto for the unit. Recruits who'd never met her still felt like they knew her, because the people who had couldn't stop talking about her. Years later, I came back on leave. The base looked the same, sunburnt and humming, but when I walked into the mess hall, something caught me off guard. The smell. The same cocoa and sugar in the air, the same warmth in the room. Behind the counter stood a young woman in uniform, hair tucked under her cap, smiling the same soft way Luna used to. I asked her if she'd ever met Sergeant Luna. She shook her head. "No, sir," she said, "but she left this." She pointed to a small wooden box by the spice rack. Inside was Luna's old recipe book, the pages curled and faded with time. I opened it carefully. Each page was annotated with notes in her neat handwriting, measurements adjusted for altitude, ingredients replaced to stretch rations. On the last page, a single line stood alone. "True strength, like chocolate, melts best when it's warm." I closed the book and sat for a long time, listening to the soft sounds of soldiers laughing, eating, living, exactly as she'd wanted. Outside, the flag swayed in the dry wind, the same flag she used to watch from the window while her brownies baked. And for a moment, I could almost hear her voice again, steady, calm, always sure. "Don't burn the edges, kid. The good stuff's always in the center." That's what she'd been teaching us all along. Not just how to lead, but how to live, how to stay human in a place that tried to make you anything but. And somewhere between the scent of chocolate and the echo of her words, I realized that some commanders leave legacies you salute. Others leave warmth you carry for life. Luna, somehow, had given us both.